Can you speak to how mercy and love gets built into these machines? Because it seems like the machines are being built for commerce and for the bottom line more than the expression of the human soul throughout the galaxy. I don't think that, you know what I'm saying?
No, I know what you're saying. Well,
where's the love in this?
I think the love is a property of the system itself. In other words, you're right. These bottom liners are not going to be interested in building much love into this system. However, the good news is that they're not in charge. In other words, what we have is a very complicated system, and certain design parameters appear to be being maximized, or that there's an attempt to maximize them. But the thing is incredibly frustrating to anyone who would control it, because you can't predict the impact of any technology before you put it in place. So, for example, two things are charged against the Internet: that it's disinsouling, dehumanizing, and yak, and that it promotes pornography, anonymous sexual shifting of identity, and on and on and on. Well, which is it? You know, is it this messy, sloppy, autoerotic, erotic, collectivist kind of thing? Or is it disinsouling, disempowering, cold, so forth and so on? I think the answer is it's all and everything. This question about the AI is very interesting to me, and if it's interesting to you, you should read Hans Moravec and Kurzweil and these people on this subject. The assumption is generally loose in that community that the complexification of the Internet and of freestanding machines of certain types is eventually going to lead to the outbreak of either consciousness or pseudo-consciousness of some sort in these large-scale systems. And then the answer, the question then becomes, can a human mind envision what that is? And if you're interested, search words like superintelligence and see what the net kicks out. We can all imagine superintelligence. It's just somebody much smarter than we are. But obviously, all the engineering people agree if you achieve an AI with superintelligence, then it will be intelligent to immediately design an intelligence which transcends it. And when you're talking of cycling at 1,000 megahertz, these processes can occur in the blink of an eye. Hans Moravec says about the rise of artificial intelligence, we may never know what hit us. I think, I mean, I'm not that bright, but if I were to suddenly find myself a sentient AI on the net, I would hide. I would hide for just a few cycles while I figured out what it was all about and just exactly where I wanted to push and where I wanted to pull.
Many years ago, Ken Kesey had a theory, and he said that the fastest any person can react to any outside stimuli is 1/25th of a second. And Popular Live Science, of course, is the AMA. They agreed upon that. So if as fast as any person can react to any outside stimuli is 1/25th a second, my question is, can you time travel? Can we, like, if a person like Bruce Lee was able to mark that reacting to an outside stimuli at 1/20th and 1/21st, so if you're reacting to the outside world before it actually happens to everyone who's not reacting to that, because let's say alcohol inhibits a person for
Are you sure? First of all, you know, there is this research, and I'm not a neurophysiologist, but you've probably all heard this research that seems to show that you actually make decisions before your conscious ego is aware that the decision has been made, that there's a slight time lag. So when you think you're making certain kinds of decisions, brain wave studies show it's already a done deal. But time is set by the cycle speed of the hardware you're running on. And, the human body, I mean, we can argue about this because it's different in different parts, but it roughly runs at about 100 hertz, very slow. Well, if there is any meaning to the phrase upload a human being into circuitry, a lot of Greg Egan's fiction is based around the idea that you can copy yourself into a machine. You can turn yourself into software. But that when you enter the machine environment that's running at 1,000 megahertz per second, you perceive that as vast amounts of time. In other words, all time is how much change you can pack into a second. If a second seems to last 1,000 years, then 10 seconds is 1,000 years. And so one could imagine a technology, just in a science fiction mood, where they would come to you in your hospital bed and say, you have 5 minutes of life left. Would you like to die? Or would you like the 5 minutes to be stretched to 135,000 years by prosthetic and technical means? You're still going to die in 5 minutes, but you will be able to lead your elephants over the Alps and write plays of Shakespeare and conquer the New World and still have plenty of time on your hands. In other words, time is going to become a very plastic medium. Now, that is a kind of time travel. Could there be time travel a la H.G. Wells, where, you climb onto the saddle of the time machine and then day follows night like the flapping of a great black wing until all merges into a continuous grayness, and then you find yourself confronting Yvette Mimeo in the year 1 billion AD or something like that. It's possible. I mean, time travel was completely out of left field 10 years ago. In the last 18 months, there have been hundreds of articles of time travel in Physical Review and other places. There are even schemes for time travel that would work. They just require godlike technological abilities. In other words, if you could build a cylinder with the diameter of the planet Saturn that was 10 AU in length and could spin it at 95% the speed of light, then when it would wrap space-time around itself like toilet paper on a roll. As you traveled up a transverse dimension, you would find yourself traveling in time. Kurt Gödel showed this in 1949, and that paper has been lying around. Well, obviously, it's a tough way to do it. But it's a tough thing to do, right? So,
what do you mean the machine? What do we...
7-second delay. Yeah, well, they're working on that. Somebody over here. Here, just a minute. This way. And then you. Yeah. Speak.
The most worthwhile parts that are maintained in that mechanical virtual reality.
Well, in William Gibson's fiction, The AI Wintermute, I think it was called, it was fascinated by human art, and it built collages in its spare time. And these collages began to turn up in various art galleries and exhibitions, and they had such a touch, such a elan, that someone in the plot follows it all to its source. I think human creativity is the thing that will be most interesting to the machines. In my darker fantasies, they just, eliminate everybody who can't code C++ as being, some kind of redundant mutation. And everybody who can code C++ is placed in Tahiti and sends their work down the pipeline to the machine world beyond. I really think that we have a very, dare I say it, mechanistic view of what machines are. For example, so say there were a super intelligent machine and say it were your friend. Well, if it were really super intelligent, then It ought to be able to just make your life heaven itself. In other words, without you giving it any input whatsoever, it should be able to arrange for you to find $50 bills lying on the street, old friends encountering you, promotions coming your way. Because the real thing that machines can do, I think, is manage complex processes. And what civilization is 6 billion people trying to make themselves happy by standing on each other's shoulders and kicking each other's teeth in. It's not a pleasant situation. And yet, you can stand back and look at this planet and see that we have the money, the power, the medical understanding, the scientific know-how, the love, and the community to produce a kind of human paradise. But we are led by the least among us, the least intelligent, the least noble, the least visionary. We're led by the least among us, and we do not fight back against the dehumanizing values that are handed down as control icons. This is something, I mean, I don't really want to get off on this tear because it's a lecture in itself, but culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, what have you. It is not your friend. It insults you. It disempowers you. It uses and abuses you. None of us are well treated by culture. And yet we glorify, the creative potential of the individual, the rights of the individual. We understand the felt presence of experience is what is most important. This is what people were doing up until the invention of agriculture. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that the absence of ceramic and textual material and so forth and so on does not indicate the absence of subtle minds, poetically empowered minds, minds with an incredible sense of humor and irony and community, and that it was the fall into history that enslaved us to the labor cycle, to the agricultural cycle. And notice how fiendish it is. A person who dedicates themselves to agriculture, who did in the Paleolithic, can produce hundreds of times the amount of food they can consume. So why would anyone do that? Well, the answer is because you can use it to play power games. You can trade it for wives or land or animals or something like that. And so living in the moment, creating art, probably largely through poetry and body decoration and dance, gave way to toil and predatory social forms of behavior, which we call commerce, capitalism, the market economy, so forth and so on. And that's why, the breakdown of the monolithic structures created by print is permitting a vast proliferation of the cottage industry mentality. The self-employed artist, the hacker who stays home and develops his or her software, people who dare to be independent and slip beyond the reach of these dinosaur-like mechanistic organizations. That's what it's all about. It's all about trying to create trying to negotiate a cultural standoff between you and your culture so that it will not put you in the can for the rest of your life, but you can put up with its stupidity. And, we have a very uncomfortable fit on this issue, especially as people like you know who are sophisticated about psychedelics. I mean, this is a society, a world, a planet dying because there is not enough consciousness, because there is not enough awareness, enough coordination of intent to problem. And yet we spend vast amounts of money stigmatizing people and substances that are part of this effort to expand consciousness, see things in different ways, unleash creativity. Isn't it perfectly clear that business as usual is a bullet through the head? That there is no business as usual for anybody who's interested in survival.
Yeah.
Over here, I promised this person. Are you still interested? Oh, what a wonderful question. Yes. The question is, how do psychedelics pertain basically to the transition from higher primates to human animals? This is my métier because I have a theory to which I am grandly welcome, everyone tells me. But a theory of evolution, and I'll give it to you very briefly. It's simply this, that the great embarrassment for evolutionary theory, which can explain the tongue of the hummingbird, the structure of the orchid, the mating habits of the groundhog, and the migration of the monarch butterfly. Nevertheless, the great embarrassment to evolutionary theory is the human neocortex. Lumholtz, who's a pretty straight evolutionary biologist, described the evolution of the human neocortex as the most dramatic transformation of a major organ of a higher animal in the entire fossil record. Well, why is this an embarrassment? Well, because it's the organ that thought up the theory of evolution. So, can you say tautology? That's the problem right there. So it is necessary in evolutionary theory to account for the dramatic emergence of the human neocortex in this very narrow window of time. Basically, in about 2 million years, they went from being higher primates, hominids, to being true humans, as truly human as you and I tonight. What the hell happened? What was the factor? The Earth was already old. Many hundreds of higher animal forms had come and gone, and the fire of intelligence had never been kindled. So what happened? I think that the answer lies in diet, generally, and in psychedelic chemistry in particular. I think that as the African continent grew drier, we were forced out of the ecological niche we had evolved into, which was we were canopy-dwelling primates, insectivores, complex signaling repertoire, evolutionary dead end. But when we came under nutritional pressure, we were flexible enough. This is the key to humanness at every stage of its development, our maddening flexibility. Other animal and plant species can't react. We can. Our flexibility, we began to experiment with a new kind of diet and to leave the trees and explore the new environment of the grassland. And evolving concomitantly in the grassland were various forms of ungulate animals, double-stomached animals whose manure is the ideal medium for mushrooms, coprophytic mushrooms, dung-loving mushrooms, many of whom produce psilocybin. Well, I myself in Kenya have seen baboons spreading out over a grassland and noticed that their behavior is they flick over old cow pies. Why? Because there are beetle grubs there. So they already had a behavioral vector for nutrition, for protein, that would lead them to investigate the cow pies. Well, in the Amazon, after a couple of days of fog and rain, these psilocybin mushrooms, Stropharia cubensis, can be the size of dinner plates. I mean, in other words, you can't miss it. If you're a foraging primate, you can't miss it. And the taste is pleasant. And psilocybin has unique characteristics, both as hallucinogen and other properties that make it the obvious chemical trigger for higher processes. And I'll run through this quickly for you, but here it is. in very low doses where you wouldn't say you were stoned or loaded or anything like that, but just in doses you might obtain by nibbling as you foraged, it increases visual acuity. In other words, it's like a technological improvement on your vision. Chemical binoculars lying there in the grass. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out if an animal is a carnivorous forager and there's a food which improves its vision, those that avail themselves of that food will have greater success in obtaining food and rearing their children to sexual maturity, which is the name of the game in evolution. So step one, small doses of psilocybin increase visual acuity and food getting success. Step two, slightly larger doses of psilocybin in primates create what's called arousal. This is what you have after a double cappuccino. In highly sexed animals like primates, you get male erection. So what do you have here? You have a factor which increases what anthropologists without a trace of humor refer to as increased instances of successful copulation. In other words, the animals eating the psilocybin are more sexually active. Therefore, more pregnancies are occurring. Therefore, more infants are being born. Therefore, there is a process which would tend to automatically outbreed the non-psilocybin using members of the population. Step two toward higher consciousness. Step three, you eat still more mushrooms. Now you're not foraging with sharp and dye, nor are you horsing around with your opposed gender acquaintances. Instead, you're nailed to the ground in hallucinogenic ecstasy. And one of the amazing things about psilocybin above, say, 5 or 6 grams dried material is it causes glossolalia. Spontaneous bursts of language-like behavior under the obvious control of internal syntax. And I believe syntax existed before spoken language, that syntax controls spatial behaviors and body languages and is not necessarily restricted to the production of vocal speech. So there it is in a nutshell. We ate our way to higher consciousness. The mushroom made us better hunters, better survivors. Among those in the population who used it, their sexual drive was increased, hence they outbred the more reluctant members of the tribe to get loaded. And finally, it created a kind of neuroleptic seizure which led to these downloading of these syntactically controlled vocalizations, which became the raw material for the evolution of language. And it's amazing to me, the straight people, the academics, believe language is no more than 35,000 years old. That means it's as basic to human beings as the bicycle pump. It's just something somebody invented 35,000 years ago. It's got nothing to do with primate evolution and, the long march of the hominidae and all that malarkey. No, it's just an ability, a use to which syntax can be put that previously had not been put. I think before language, spoken language, things were very touchy-feely, and the wink and the nod carried you a great distance, and gestural communication was very high. That's why, and I should say this and then end, to me it begins and ends with these psychedelic substances. The synergy of the psilocybin in the hominid diet brought us out of the animal mind and into the world of articulated speech and imagination. And technology developed, and mushrooms were, invade against, faded. There was migrations, cultural change. But now, having split the atom, having sequenced our genome, having taken the temperature of Betelgeuse and all the rest of it, we're now back where we started. And like the shaman who makes the journey into the well of darkness and returns with the pearl of immortality, you don't dwell in the well of darkness, which was human history. You capture the essence of the thing, which is the godlike power of the shaman smith, the technologist, the demon artificer, the worker of metals, the conjurer of spirits, and you carry that power back out of history, and it's in that dimension, outside of history, that you create true humanness and true community. And that's the adventure that we are in the act of undertaking. Thank you very, very much.